Welcome back. Let's get back into it. The GET method was pretty simple, but what about testing POST requests? We'll start off similarly by making our callback here async and setting the response equal to await request, passing in the app object with all of our Express middleware, and then we'll chain, this time not get, but .post on the launches collection. So that's a POST request. To send some data, we can call this .send function, which takes in an object that will be passed in as JSON. So what were our required launch properties again? We set the mission, say that's the USS Enterprise. We needed to set the rocket, which can be something like NCC 1701-D. And we need a target. That's our exoplanet. So target will be Kepler-186f. And finally, a launch date. So we'll set it to Isaac Newton's birthday of January 4th, and we'll say it's 2028. Now, just like above, we can check the headers and the response status code. So we'll .chain. Just like above, the content type must be JSON, and the status code this time isn't 200, but 201 created. So we should actually rename our test case here that a post to /launch should respond with a 201 created. Let's check our terminal to make sure that things are passing. Looks good. But there was one more thing that we kind of got stuck on when we were building the launches controller. And anything that we struggled with when implementing it is definitely something that's worth testing. What was that? Well, it was the way we handle our launch date. Remember, what we pass in as the launch date in the body will get converted into a date object. And the stringified version of that date object is what will be returned in the response. So we should probably be checking the response body that's returned from this request to make sure that all of the appropriate properties are being set. So we could do, this time we're not going to use our Supertest assertions. Whenever we check the body, we're going to use our jest assertions. So we'll say expect response.body, and here's where we'll be using some of Jest's assertion API. So in our jestjs.io website, we can go under the API, and then on the left here, under expect, we have a list of all of the different ways that we can expect two values to match. So we've already seen that we can do expect.toBe and pass in a value, which is used to compare primitive values. For example, that a value is 12. But if we want to check that one object contains a certain set of properties, we're going to use a different match function. So let's take a look. We have this .toMatchObject function, which sounds like it's doing what we need. It checks that a JavaScript object matches a subset of the properties of another object. What this means for us is that we can say expect response body .toMatchObject, passing in a set of properties that we know need to match. So what if we pass in everything that we sent in the request? Let's see what our tests are telling us. We have a failure. The launch date that we passed in was January 4th, 2028, but what we got back was this stringified JavaScript date format. We're going to need to handle the date in a different way. Let's remove the date from our object that we're matching here, and we'll handle the date above. What we're going to do is we'll set this request date constant, which we'll set to the date that we pass in the request. So first, let's move this object out and set it in our describe block above our test case. This way, we'll be able to reuse it in all of our different tests. And we'll be clear what test data our post tests will be making use of. Let's say that we have a constant complete launch data with everything that we need to pass in. That's going to be this object with all of our required properties. And then we'll have another constant, launch data without the date. And we'll set that to the exact same object with the launch date removed. Now in our test case, we can send the complete launch data, and it's data, not date. So let's fix that up here as well. Launch data without date, that's correct. We send the complete launch data, and then we match the launch data without date. To make sure that the date part is working as we expect, we set the request date variable here to complete launch data dot launch date, and we're going to match this in some way with the date that comes back from the response, which will be const response date, and that's the response dot body dot launch date. So we've extracted the date from our response and from our request. Now we need to make sure that they refer to the same date, even if they're in different formats. We can do this by passing in those values into our date constructor and matching the values of those dates. So we can use the .valueOf function to get the numerical representation of our date, which we can then compare with our to-be matcher, because it's a primitive value. So let's see what this looks like. We'll construct our response date, new date, response body launch date, dot value of. And now to make sure that they're equal, we'll say expect response date to be request date. It reads almost like English. Let's see if Jest likes what we've written. Looks good. Our tests are passing. We can even see the logs of our server are showing that we're making a GET request as well as a POST request with the correct response codes. What about the error cases? Let's complete our launches tests in the next video. I'll see you soon.